Hi guys, Jay here, and I'm back with another F1 Fantasy pre-season video where I'm going to be giving you my top picks for budget saver, budget makers, point scorers, assets to avoid, and I've also got some dark horses. I'm recording this 2 days before pre-season testing, so do keep that in mind, and I will be reading off of a bunch of notes that I wrote the other day. So first of all, I've got my budget saver, and I've gone with Gabriel Bortoleto. I'm predicting him to be the cheapest asset at around 6 to 6.5 million. He's valued on Grid Rivals at 3.4 million. Just for context, F1 Fantasy is in dollars, Grid Rivals is in pounds, because I'm going to be referring to Grid Rivals values as well as comparisons throughout this video. But yeah, I've got him predicted to be the cheapest asset, 6 to 6.5 million on F1 Fantasy. I predicted him to start most Grand Prix at the back, because obviously he's in the Sauber, but I do think he'll gain points and places via other cars' mistakes, such as DNFs, pit stop strategies, that kind of thing. So similar to Zhou Guanyu last season, Zhou Guanyu became a very reliable asset because he would be starting from the back, he would keep it safe and gain positions that way, giving us a couple of points each Grand Prix, as well as being one of, if not the cheapest asset in the game. So I'm thinking of Bortoleto as this year's Zhou Guanyu. Also, he's last year's F2 champion, so the 2024 F2 champion. So again, he should be reliable. He's backed by Fernando Alonso as well. And so I don't see him making too many mistakes, even though it's his rookie year. And that's why I've gone for Bortoleto as my budget saver. Next, I've got my budget makers. So I've got HAAS, but not HAAS the constructor. HAAS is in Esteban Ocon and Oliver Bearman, so the driver assets, and Pierre Gasly. So I'm going to break them down to each asset. Esteban Ocon, he was 4th last season in increased value, and that's taken into account the result at Brazil, where him and Gasly got on the podium. He went from 7.8 million to 14.4 million in value. That was an increase of 6.6 million. He's my top prediction for the most increased in value this season. Last season, it was Kevin Magnussen, who went from 6.2 to 14.3, an increase of 8.1. So even though Magnussen had a lower starting price than what I think Ocon is going to have this season, I still see Ocon gaining the most value. I'm predicting Ocon to start at around 8 million. He's valued on Grid Rivals at 13.2 million. He was also ranked 8th last season for overtakes with 99, and I think that'll improve, and that's partly why I think he will still top the increased value chart, even though his starting value I think will be less than what Kevin Magnussen's was last year. So he's my top pick for value increase. Along with Esteban Ocon, I've gone for his new teammate, Oliver Bearman. As we know, Oliver Bearman was overpriced last season. He came in at 14 million originally, but he did drop down to 13.8, so he lost 0.2 million. Bear in mind, his first race was in a Ferrari, where he covered for Carlos Sainz at the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix. And then later on, he covered for Kevin Magnussen in the HAAS. So I do think that's partly why his value was so high originally. This season, it's obviously his first full rookie season, so I think his starting value will be more sensible, and I think he'll be starting at around 7 million, so just slightly less than Ocon, and he's valued at 10.4 million on Grid Rivals. If he performs well, I think he could also be a safe budget builder and point scorer, but obviously he'll need to avoid things such as DNFs. And I also think he could give Esteban Ocon a run for his money, again, if he performs well. I can see Ocon and Bearman being almost evenly matched. I say almost because I'm just going by experience, because obviously Ocon's got a lot more Formula 1 Grand Prix experience, but there's no doubt in Bearman's potential. So I think these two as a team is going to work. I really do. And my third option is Pierre Gasly. So he's my top prediction for the most overtakes this season. He finished 11th last season with 90. Most he got was 11 during the Austria weekend. The highest scorer was Leclerc with 14 at Abu Dhabi after starting lower down the grid because Leclerc took that grid penalty. I think it was his engine. Gasly finished with an average of 3.8 overtakes per race. So that's sprints and Grand Prix combined. Magnussen had the highest average with 6.4 per race. Now, if I just show you this table from Fantasy Tools, you'll see Gasly's quite far down, but the reason I say Gasly is because Kevin Magnussen, Sergio Perez, Nico Hülkenberg are no longer in F1. Hamilton's going to be in a Ferrari, so his car is going to be better performing than the Mercedes. So he won't have to overtake as often, in theory. Lance Stroll was 4th, but I'm not expecting much from the Aston Martins this year. I think their focus is purely on 2026. Piastri is in the McLaren, and again, I think McLaren's going to perform even better this year. So again, I don't see Piastri having to make as many overtakes. Jack Doohan only had the one race last year. Tsunoda and Albon. Tsunoda, I think the Racing Bulls are actually going to struggle this year just because of a lack of experience with HAAS, and I'm worried about Tsunoda's confidence given what happened over the winter break with the whole Red Bull situation. With Albon, I'm thinking Williams will be a little better this year. Not just because they've now got Sainz, but I just think that experience combined. That being said, because I don't think the car's going to be that much improved, I don't know if he'll get as many overtakes this year. So that's why Gasly's my pick for overtakes. So with these overtakes in mind, the theory is it will lead to an increase in value and points. Last season, Gasly's value increased from 7.8 million to 11.8 million. So that was a total increase of 4 million. I'm predicting his starting value this season will be also around 8 million because I see Gasly and Ocon very similar in terms of their asset value and ability. He's valued on grid rivals at 16 million and could possibly increase beyond last season's 4 million increase. And what I mean by that is increased last season by 4 million. But I think if he takes last year's form, the end of last year when he was on good form, takes that into this season, I can see him increasing his value even more this season. And yeah, the last 2 points I've already covered. So yeah, providing he continues his good form, I can see him getting the most overtakes and I can see him getting an even higher increase in value. Starting at 8 million is my prediction, and I think he'll increase more than his 4 million increase last season. Finally, just on budget makers, I do have an outside option, which is Ferrari, and that's the constructor asset. They topped last year's constructors value increase rankings from 19.3 to 25.3 million, so that was an increase of 6 million. In terms of Leclerc and Sainz as their own individual assets, Leclerc increased from 19.1 to 26.1 million, and Sainz increased from 18.5 to 24.4 million. I predict Ferrari will start around 20 million this season. They're valued at 27.2 million in grid rivals. The difference this year is that I can see Ferrari becoming a tier A asset during the season, at least by mid-season, I would say. And I can also see them possibly becoming the meta. I can see Ferrari becoming the triple Ferrari becoming the meta later in the season, which will lead to a slightly less increase in overall value, but a good choice for points. And the reason I say that is because obviously Hamilton's coming for Sainz. Hamilton's raring to go. I think once he gets his groove going, I do think Ferrari are going to be a force to be reckoned with this season. And that's why I think they're going to become a tier A asset very, very, at least by mid-season, I think they'll be a tier A asset. And I can see them becoming, I can see the triple Ferrari, becoming the meta later in the season. So talking of being a force to be reckoned with, let's talk about point scorers. So I've got 3 assets. I've got Verstappen, I've got Norris, and as I just mentioned a little while ago, I've got Ferrari. So I've got a general note here, and that is predicting a four-way battle for the World Drivers' Championship and a two-way battle for the World Constructors' Championship, McLaren and Ferrari. I think it's going to be very, very close this season, both in terms of drivers and constructors. I want McLaren to win. I've said this before, but I think Ferrari will in terms of the constructors. I also think Verstappen's going to win his 5th title. I want Norris, but I think it will be Verstappen. So let's break down my choices. So Max Verstappen, he was the highest fantasy points scorer last season with 754 points. That's an average of 31.42 per race. Despite predicting the Red Bull asset being weaker overall, because I think Red Bull will be weaker this season, I can still see Verstappen getting good results. And as I said, even his 5th World Drivers' Championship. But it's going to be close. I predict his starting value to be around 28 million, so that's less than last year. He's valued on grid rivals at 30 million. So not as expensive as last season to start with, but I do think he'll increase very early on because I do think he's going to get the results. So in terms of value increase, not much, but in terms of points, I think he's a shoo-in. Again, look at what he did in Brazil last year. Lando Norris. So Norris had the most driver of the days with 7 and fastest laps with 6 than any other driver last season. That was a total of an extra 130 fantasy points over the season. I've also got McLaren to top the pit stop rankings this season as well. They came 2nd last season with a total of 5, which was 5 less than Red Bull, who had 10. Again, a top contender for World Drivers' Championship, so should be a top scoring asset. He'll be a tier A asset starting, that's not even a question. He finished last season 2nd with a total of 695 fantasy points, an average of 28.96 per race. I predict his starting value at 26.5 million. Again, as I said, making him a tier A asset. He increased his value last season from 23 to 27.5 million, so that was an increase of 4.5 million. He's valued on grid rivals at 28.6 million. So I expect his value to increase early, like just marginally. But again, as I said, tier A asset this season rather than tier B. And so I would say with Norris, you're looking at points rather than value increase. So yeah, point score of Norris. Finally, Ferrari, so Leclerc and Hamilton. In this case, I'm talking about both the constructor and the drivers, really. So I expect both drivers to be fighting in the World Drivers' Championship, as I said, with Ferrari fighting for the World Constructors' Championship, making them a good scoring option. Again, as I said, I think there'll be the possible meta later on, triple Ferrari. Last season, Leclerc finished 3rd with 684 fantasy points. That was 28.5 per race. And Hamilton in a Mercedes, so bear in mind Hamilton was in a Mercedes last year, he finished 6th with 495 fantasy points, 20.63 per race. That's a combined total of 1,179 points. Ferrari finished 3rd in the constructors with 1,414 fantasy points. That was 58.92 per race. Ferrari also topped last year's constructors' value increase ranking, so keep that in mind, as I mentioned earlier in the video. So, assets to avoid. I've got 2. Jack Doohan and Isaac Hadjar. Neither of them may come as a surprise. So, general note, I don't feel enough is known about these drivers at this stage, other than that Hadjar coming 2nd in F2 last season, losing the title to Bortoleto towards the end of last season. So I'll just show you the results sheet from Wikipedia of F2's championship last season. And you can see here that Gabriel Bortoleto won by, 22 points, 22.5 points roughly. So yeah, not enough is known about these two at this stage. Jack Doohan. I'm predicting Jack Doohan to get the most DNFs this season. It's just a gut feeling. This of course leads to negative points with the 2024 rule structure. So if that stays for 2025, then if an asset gets a DNF, it's minus 25 points. So I think Doohan is an avoid for the time being. I'm predicting his starting value to be around 6.5 million. He's valued on grid rivals at 4.8 million. Again, it's just a gut feeling that his value is unlikely to change throughout the season, if not decrease. As for Isaac Hadjar, as I said earlier, I'm predicting the Racing Bulls for the most constructors DNFs this season. I worry about Hadjar and Sonoda. I worry that they're going to struggle for different reasons this year. But with Hadjar, it's a lack of F1 experience. He only had, I don't know if he had more than one free practice last year, but he had free practice in Abu Dhabi, and I wasn't really feeling it. And I've also heard talks that he can be hot-headed at times as well. And I don't know, I'm not feeling Hadjar, if I'm completely honest. But he did come second in F2 last year, so we'll see. I'm predicting his value to be around 6.5 to 7 million, but I can't make up my mind on an exact number. The reason I've struggled with this is because I wanted to value him at 6.5, but then I'd be valuing him the same as Bortoletto, who's in a Sauber, whereas Hadjar's in a Racing Bull, and I couldn't justify that. So that's why I've said 6.5 to 7 million. He's valued on grid rivals at 9 million. So yeah, they're the two assets that I'm not feeling for this year. Finally, I've got some dark horses for you. So assets that I think could be a good surprise. And I've got Williams in terms of Alexander Albon and Carlos Sainz. The reason I've gone for Alexander Albon and Carlos Sainz is because they're two experienced drivers this season. Whereas over the last few years, Albon has had a less than adequate partner in terms of Sargent and Latifi. But also they're under good leadership, i.e. James Vowles, who is, he's looking at the long run. He's looking at the next 10 to 20 years. I watched Lawrence Barretto interview Albon and Sainz the other day on the F1 YouTube channel, and Sainz said something that I picked up on, which was something along the lines of making the sacrifice for the longer benefit of the team. To me, that screams, let's just get through this year and focus on 2026, because we want to be, at least in the midfield, if not towards the front, with obviously the long-term goal being at the front. But I digress. It's two experienced drivers, and I think they will pull off some good results at times. I'm not saying it's going to be every weekend, but I think they can do it. In terms of Alexander Albon on his own, as we know, unfortunately, he didn't have a great fantasy season last year. He had 7 DNFs, and he basically became known for having DNFs in F1 fantasy. However, on a good day, he can score reasonable points. His best result last season coming in Austria and Azerbaijan with 12 fantasy points. Hoping with Sainz as a teammate, he'll up his game. So, on a good day, 12 to 15 points is what I'm thinking for Albon. Despite the 7 DNFs, he still gained in value. He went from 7 to 8.6 million. So he gained 1.6 million in value. So just think about that. If he hadn't have had all those DNFs, that would have increased even more because he would have scored more points. Again, if he has a DNF-free season, he could be a good asset. I'm estimating his starting value to be around the same price, so 7 million. He's valued on grid rivals at 11.8 million. And finally, Carlos Sainz. He finished 5th last season in the fantasy point scoring. He scored 504 fantasy points. That's 29.91 per race, albeit in a Ferrari, and had a value increase of 5.9 million, as mentioned earlier in the video. I'm hoping that Sainz will be able to get something out of the car and fighting for points towards the back. Again, he's going from a Ferrari to a Williams, so I'm not expecting him to score as many points as fantasy points as last season. But I do think he's experienced enough to do well in a Williams, if that makes sense. And again, what I mean by that is I think he'll be another reliable asset for some points when you're picking your back markers, if you've got the budget. So from a Ferrari to a Williams, that means less starting value. So I'm predicting him to be around 9 to 11 million, depending. So you may want to wait and see how he performs at first. So when I was typing this note, my thought process was 9 million would be probably sensible, given he's in a Williams. But because he's Carlos Sainz, would they value him a little, like slightly overpriced? So to me, 11 million might be too much for a Williams driver. So I would wait and see how he performs over the first few races. But if he becomes good value for money, then he would be a good pick. So with Albon, it's more of a value increase. If he performs well with Sainz, it's more of a points tally. So those are my picks. Sorry if my talking practice video was a bit broken. Like I say, I've typed up all these notes the other day, so I was reading them as I was going through them. But I hope the video made sense, and I hope it helps when it comes to your choice selection on day one. I don't know when I'm releasing this video. I don't know if I'm releasing it this week because I've already got a liveries reaction video, or if I'm going to release it next week. Because the trouble is, next week I'm hoping we'll have the new fantasy rules, and then in 2 weeks at the time of this recording, we should be picking our first team for the Australia Grand Prix. So yeah, well, whenever I decide to release it, I hope you've enjoyed it. And if you want to check out my top predictions for the drivers' statistics and the constructors' statistics in F1 Fantasy, then check out the videos above my head right now. And I hope you enjoy them, and I'll speak to you soon. Thank you so much for watching.